Hello everybody, how's it going? This is a calculator. And as it's a calculator, it can do many things. But its main thing is that it can do this. 1 plus 1, what does that equal? It equals 2, as we all know. But how did we get here? Look how small it is. You see this? It's very thin. It's about as thin as me. How did we get to this point? I'll tell you how we get to this point. So they weren't always that small. They were about yay wide, a little bit wider back in the olden days. Anyways, it all begins back in 1967. In 1967, the first ever handheld calculator was produced. It was produced by a team at Texas Instruments. The Texas Instruments, they produced this tiny calculator. They called it Caltech. Now, Caltech, they called it that, and it could roughly fit inside your palm. Now, it needed to be plugged into a wall for it to work, and it printed out its results on paper strip. But it did what math calculators need to do. It could add, it could subtract, it could multiply, and it could divide. What else do you need for a calculator? Now, the first calculators to be portable and on the market released in 1970. Now these were very, very costly. That will come a point later. Most of these early calculators, you still needed to plug them into the wall to work, and they were so a little big. They would probably take up your entire hand. They were like bigger than this, you know. They were still kind of big, but they still were portable. Anyways, in 1971, calculators using integrated circuit design began to be produced, and one of these early ones was the MK6010. Now, the MK6010 was also important because it was the first one to run off of chargeable, replaceable batteries. All the ones, like I said, had to put in the wall. The MK6010, it could you take out if it died, take out the batteries, put in new batteries. Lose a battery, you know. So it was pretty big. So it was pretty big deal. And now, what is generally considered to be the first ever truly portable and handheld calculator would be the LE LE 128 Handy. Now this would be as it was released in early 1971. Now it used an LED display. That's kind of important. Now as by even 1971, they were still fairly expensive. These portable calculators, but this one is so small enough to the point where they consider it was generally the first sort of truly portable one, and they're still very expensive now. Now you see, the thing is, more now these calculators were still fairly big. Now the first ones that weren't as big as the rest, actually, the first one that was like just about this size basically was the Sinclair Executive. Now, the Sinclair Executive was released in 1970, was released in 1972, in 1972, and it was pure black, and you didn't have as many buttons, and the LCD and the display was red, and black on red on black. It's a nice color scheme, red on black. Anyways, now Sinclair would also produce some of the earliest affordable calculators. Some of the earliest affordable calculators they would produce would be the Sinclair Cambridge. Now, Sinclair Cambridge came in August of 1973, and compared to other calculators at the time, it wasn't really that expensive. Now, this was a British company. Now, in pounds, it was $29.95, but in United States dollars, that was $41.03. Now, adjusted for inflation, that is $259.53. Now, that may seem like a lot, but this was only 3 years into calculators. You know, this is like video games consoles coming out like 3 years afterwards. Are like, I don't know, but it was pretty cheap compared to the other ones. Like, people before the Sinclair Cambridge, most people who could afford these things were like executives, they were rich people. So this was a big stepping stone in cheapening these things for the general consumer public. Now, all these calculators could only do your basics, like I mentioned: multiply, subtract, divide, multiply. Now, the first one I could do scientific calculations, which at this point was still only done by slide rulers, as had been done for since before calculators were forever, basically. That came out in 1972, actually. Yeah, 72, and it was called the HP 35. Now, a following HP calculator became the first ever programmable one, and you could program into 100 instructions into it. And now this would be the HP This would be the HP 65. Now the HP 65 came out in 1974. This ain't it, but yeah, came out in 1974. Now 2 years down the line, another HP one called HP 25C. I don't know why they went down in numbers. It's strange, but anyways, I don't know. I'm not HP. Anyways, it allowed for memory to be stored on the calculator while I was off using a thing called CMOS. CMOS. That's it's pronounced CMOS. This tech, it's an anagram or something else. Anyways, and it really complicated. They don't understand, but using that technique, they allowed it to store while it was turned off. Now, in 1979, something big happened. Expandable calculators. And this was another HP invention, the HP 41C. Now, the HP 41C was expandable. I mean, they could add on things. And what could you add on? Well, you could add on, a floppy disk, microcassette drives. Yeah, you could add on that. You could add on barcodes. You could add on RAM and ROM drives. You could add on a whole lot. Those and like some other things. But yeah, imagine having a calculator and having like a floppy disk drive connected to it, a microcassette drive connected to it, and then you have RAM drive connected to it, barcode drive connected to it, and like a ROM drive connected to it. All those things you just are all connected to it, and that's now around I think time two. That same year too, they started producing calculators that were powered using solar batteries, they were sun powered. The sun gave them power. And one of these ones was the Royal Solar One. And these were now by 1979, calculators were getting much more cheaper. They had by 79 they had dropped the prices because so many companies were producing them. As companies realized this was a very profitable business, so more and more companies started producing them. And as more companies started producing them, the amount of them went up, and as the amount went up, the prices dropped and as technology developed, the price to produce these also went down. And as prices go down to produce them, that means the price for the calculators themselves went down. And as more people were making them, there's more supply, and there's more supply, and that cheaper to get supplies, it makes it easier, supply and demand. And so calculators were dropping now by this point. Now, in 1985, graphing calculators started getting produced by our good old friend, Casio. Yeah. It's been a coincidence that I haven't owned a Casio. I owned this like my whole life. I don't know when I got this Casio calculator. It's been in my house forever, basically. Anyways, and now this calculator was called the Casio FX 705. So technically, I probably more likely Casio FX 7005. Anyways, yeah, that was the first ever graphing calculator. And now the main ones who are still around are Texas Instruments, and of course those are like the main ones. Most people who own calculators and like for school, they use Texas Instruments calculators, and of course Casio. They still make theirs, and Texas Instruments makes theirs. They're very expensive still to this day. Like what they make you buy for school, we don't use those sort of calculators. We just use Desmos in math class. When we rarely use Desmos, we used Desmos a lot more last year in 7th grade. We don't really use it that much this year. Yeah, we use like the little tiny ones in 7th grade. Not these sort of big ones. Anyways, and eventually, of course, they just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And by the 1980s, they had gotten they were even producing some like credit card sized ones. And since technology was expanding at such a rapid rate at the time, these got to the point where you could make these this thin. And of course, as the executive was already this pre-sized by 1972, and it was expensive, but still. And of course, as years went on, technology got more and more advanced, and also the calculator wars, which they were called, during the early to mid 70s, when everybody started producing calculators, was referred as the calculator wars when they just started. And after this, it kind of by the end of the 70s, it was all over with. Yeah, that's all I gotta say, folks. Like and subscribe. That's all I gotta say. Bye bye.